This is just to give you some idea of what the important parts of Chapter 2 are, and I'm using the slides to give that information. To get through it and have an idea. The models we're particularly interested in are the classical model and Hickshaw-Lolene model. And the assumptions are to enhance your understanding that these are what's behind the ability to be able to say this is what's going to happen, especially this assumption that agents want to make decisions that make them better off or at least not worse off. The tools that are in this chapter are to allow them to be able to do that. And the simplest and most important one are collected in this slide, which are 2 countries, 2 goods. As we move through this, that oversimplification is part of demonstrating how there are gains from trade. The nominal price issue is simply to give you an idea that everything in this discussion is in terms of amounts of goods, and nominal prices are just a way to get there. So that can be difficult to go through, but it's necessary. The same thing is about cost. Yes, you have to pay for workers, you have to pay for raw materials, but the essential idea here is that you have resources you could use to produce either good. But making a decision to produce one instead of the other has a cost in terms of the amount of the other good that you can't make. In amongst these assumptions, competitive market models lead to the conclusion that the price the units sell for is equal to the opportunity cost of the last unit to produce. And so that's why when we get to equilibrium, if you know one, you know the other. And the explanation here goes through some examples, and I know that there's some examples on the homework, and I'm sure that's just a matter of working through it, writing it down in a way that you keep things straight as to what you're actually trying to calculate. And I hope that if you go through the slides, I've extended the descriptions quite detailed in order to get there. So I'm going to move ahead and get into the graphs, because I think those are things that maybe an explanation might be more useful for. So this graph is intended to look at the quantities of the 2 goods, and the vertical axis measures the yards of textiles. So if the producers in this country only produce textiles, the maximum they could produce is 50 units, and if they only produce soybeans, it would be 200 units. The line that goes in between represents different combinations that they could produce or purchase, if you want to look at it from the price point of view, given the resources they have and the trade between what you're giving up when you make one more unit of soybeans. And that's where this slope concept comes in. The slope is about a rate of change, how the amount of the variable on the vertical axis has to change in order to make the variable on the horizontal axis change by 1 unit. It turns out that we could use prices to do this calculation. You could also do the calculation in calculating the actual slope, which would be to use 2 points and do the change in T over the change in S. And we will do that in some of the further graphs. But this is to show you that the idea of relative price is about this change you have to go through in order to procure, to acquire, to have one more unit of S, if we want to use the absolute value of the slope, and the inverse of that, 1 over the slope, to get the relative price. How many units of S won't we be able to produce for every T we want to produce? You probably could do this if you didn't have the math in front of you, so don't get hung up on this area. It's just a matter of using the values and being able to do the calculations. So I'm going to skip ahead. I'm assuming everybody's going to go through that. Opportunity cost, as it says here, is this idea that there's going to be a sacrifice, and the economy has these fixed resources, the technology, and that's an important limitation, but it's also going to be part of what we're doing. There's two types of production situations where this opportunity cost is going to be displayed. The first is a straight line production possibility frontier, which hopefully you should know, and maybe if you have to check earlier material to do that, is this maximum combination of the goods that the country can make. Or it's called an increasing cost production possibility frontier, and this is the one that's bowed out. And here's pictures of the two. And it's basically taking this world of two goods and creating limitations. So, for instance, if you're on the production possibility frontier, either the straight line or the curve, that's the maximum output this country can produce of these two goods. Any point inside the curve is possible but inefficient. You're not fully employed, you've got resources you're not using. And any point above the line is beyond the capacity of this nation to produce. And I skipped ahead, but the idea here is that if you're looking at this two good world, you're going to be able to talk about the opportunity cost of the good on the horizontal axes in terms of the good on the vertical, and the opportunity cost of the good on the vertical in terms of the horizontal. But again, we're going to be able to use slope to help us do that. One of the good things is that for slope of the straight line, it's just reading it off that information. In the bowed or the increasing cost, it's not as simple as that, but we're going to use a methodology here, which is to draw a straight line tangent to the curve at a given point, and then use the slope of that straight line as an approximation. In the world we've constructed, the slope of that straight line is going to give you the opportunity cost of S in terms of T, but it's also going to give you the relative price of S in terms of T, presuming the country gets to equilibrium, and that's what's going to be the price of the good. If you haven't kind of got to the picture, the opportunity costs and the production possibility frontier should represent to you the supply side of this economic story. The demand side is going to be captured by what we call indifference curves. From individual point of view, we say that even disregarding prices and income, consumers think about what is this product, or in this case, combination of products, worth to me? What is its value? Which ones give me more satisfaction? Which ones give me less? And it allows us, again, to divide up this world of goods in a way that's going to be useful for saying, hey, that's better than this one. That's worse than this one. Why would I make that trade? So we have a whole theory of it in micro. We aggregate it, replicate it using the whole country, that sentiment, that measure, that thinking about the whole production that's possible, and therefore the whole consumption that's possible, in this form of indifference curves. But basically all they're intended to show is, and you should be able to follow along, that the more you have, and if we did a straight line out from the origin, we'd have more and more and more of each good, the higher the satisfaction, the higher the utility, the better it is from the consumer's point of view. But there are trade-offs they could make which actually leave them in the same level of satisfaction. And that's what each individual line is. So on a given line, the level of satisfaction is fixed. The further it is from the origin, the more satisfaction, which then allows us to say that this consumer, this community would be better off with any point above CIC1, including all the ones on CIC2, and would be worse off if they got any combination on the CIC0. And it's just a tool to reflect the criterion that individuals make about their demand for different products. And you can read through this. Autarky is just a word for self-sufficiency, just to tell us about without trade. And the discussion here is to set up if all the lines points on the PPF are possible, if all the points on the CIC are the individuals or the community's ranking. Obviously, if you want to profit maximize in the economy, you need to make the maximum your economy can make. And if you want to maximize satisfaction, you need to be on the highest CIC. That is possible. And that's what the production possibility frontier tells us. So what this graph is trying to show is that Y is a combination which is possible, and it uses our resources fully. It's efficient, but it's not there's not a settled point there, because the consumers can envision, understand, think ahead of a combination which is going to give them more satisfaction if they could only get a little less of the soybeans and more of the textiles. And that also is possible from the firm's point of view. So if they produce down here, the implication is that there wouldn't be the demand for the combination, and there'd be incentive from consumers for the producers to produce more textiles, to switch their resources to producing textiles. And once we got to Z, if you see it, there's no other point on CIC1 they could have reached. Therefore, it's highlighting the idea that this is the best we can do given the possibilities. And therefore, there won't be either side of production or consumption, supply or demand pushing away from Z. Therefore, we get equilibrium. This is also true of the increasing cost picture. The difference is that we also have to add an extra line to the story, which gives us our relative prices. In the constant cost, you have the line. This line is the production possibility frontier. This line is the relative price line, or the slope of that line will be the relative price. So you're done with your drawing at that point. An issue I want to come back and point out to you is this combination will be the combination the country produces, and this combination will be the combination the country consumes when it is at closed economy or autarky equilibrium. And the same is true in this case, that other combinations were possible, but the one that delivered the highest possible satisfaction is also on a CIC curve, and also on it in the context that it's tangent. This is on both, but it's not tangent. So this idea where it just touches, it doesn't cut, is tangency, and the relationship is that opportunity cost is going to be equal to the relative price. You're going to have profits maximized because you're at the production possibility frontier, and you're going to maximize the consumer satisfaction. So this sets the case, or the benchmark, against which trade is going to take place, and how we're going to compare that to how well we're doing when we look at this combination and then compare it to the other combination.